Okay. All right. So we are recording right now. I am talking to Dr. Chris Poulus. And did I see your name right? The last name?
Poulus.
Poulus. Okay, sorry. I never had to call you by your last name before, so this is the first time. So I'm engaging Dr. Poulus here because Dr. Poulus is a prolific writer. He does writing workshops for International Congress of Qualitative Inquiry. So we were just talking about Dr. Poulus's piece that is called Transgressions, which is a performative piece, and he was reflecting on his writing process for that. So go ahead, Dr. Poulus.
Well, so normally I'm pretty disciplined and try to sit down and write things that I think need to be written. But I don't normally write performance pieces. I've written a couple, but I don't usually write them that way. So I tried really hard to figure out a way to write this as a narrative. And it was a good example of how, and I think a lot of people suffer from this, something was blocking it. It was just not coming. It was just the point where I was going to give up and say, okay, I'll just move on to something else. And I did. I just finally just went, okay, I'm not going to do this. And then one day I sat down at my computer and I started writing. And this was a one-off thing. It got published without even any revisions. I wrote that performance in about 2 hours. And in that case, I was, and this has happened to me a number of times, where I felt like I was, a lot of my writing process must have been happening in some kind of gestation period before I was actually writing. The actual writing itself was more like feeling like I was writing something that was already there. I was just recording it. So it was kind of flowing through me in a way. I didn't outline it. I didn't try to make it go in a particular direction. It has elements of Shakespearean tragedy and Greek chorus kinds of things in it. Those things just sort of came to me as I was writing it. And I've had a number of occasions where I sat down to write something and it took me in a direction I didn't expect. So I'm always ready. Part of my writing process is being ready for the unexpected. If that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense. You brought up two pieces of writing that is really important. And I know I have sent prompts, but I'm very conversational in interviews, so I'm open to what comes up in our conversation. So one was the gestation part, which is really interesting, where it felt like you had downloads and you were just like putting it out into the paper or whatever was happening in your gestation period. And then the other part was the unexpected turn. So then that goes into what Richardson and Pierre talked about, writing as inquiry, and writing as analysis. So you go between both processes, would you say, in your writing?
Yes. And actually, the writing as inquiry is my primary mode. Okay. So the other example that was the thing that turned in a direction I didn't expect, I woke up one morning with a song lyric going through my head, which it was an old Beatles song from the 60s. And it triggered a memory that I had from my childhood. So I just started writing about that memory, which led to writing about other memories, which led to writing about memory as a phenomenon that I wanted to research in more depth. So I started off with a memory, like a little shred of a memory, a song lyric, and it opened up into this whole sort of project. And my discovery process has been along those lines. The same thing happened with my book on family secrecy. I heard part of the family secret being revealed, and I got curious about what that was and what that was about and why was there a secret in this case. And then I got involved in sort of thinking about families and secrecy and why families have secrets and what kinds of secrets and what kinds of purposes do they serve. And it became a whole book project out of just overhearing a secret being sort of leaked. It's a kind of, I guess, intuitive, inductive kind of process of writing and using the writing as the method of inquiry as a way to get into things.
Right.
It all depends on what you're trying to do in qualitative inquiry. But I think if I go back to the gestational period, I think of it as, you're gathering data, you're gathering information, gathering, learning out where it is your project is on. You're reading, you're observing, you're interviewing, you're talking to people, you're having conversations, you're doing all this stuff. And that all comes together and becomes for lack of a better word, something that's big enough to give birth to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's why I use gestational. It's sort of like, okay, we're sort of gestating here, and then somehow it's got to get from in here and in my notes and whatever else I'm doing, field notes or whatever it is you're doing, recordings, transcripts, all that sort of thing that we do, get from there into some kind of coherent story or narrative or paper article or anything that it's going to take in writing. And for that, you need that sort of moment where it's a reckoning of, it's a moment of reckoning. You have to actually sit down and do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that brings me to the other question that I had of sitting down and doing it. Do you have a time where you write, like this is a block time, I sit down and I do it?
Morning.
I'm
a morning person. I like to start early. Mm-hmm. And I like to go, I don't anymore set aside a specific number of hours every day or something like that. I used to do that. Now I sort of go until it's done for the day. And so sometimes that's an hour, sometimes that's 2 hours. Sometimes it's, that stuff gets in the way and I don't do it all at all. Sometimes there'll be days where I just pull back and let it sort of simmer. Mm-hmm. But most of the time I'm writing something and I'm trying to focus. And my process is write till I feel done that day. And then the very first thing I do the next day is come back to what I've written and rework it and edit it. And so I'm an editor as I go kind of person. I polish as I go. Mm-hmm. I don't send things off to people before they're ready.
Right.
So I make it good. And I'm very interested because I write autoethnography, I'm very interested in language and the rhythm of words and kind of how words go together, for lack of a better word, poetically. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in what I'm writing about, but I'm also interested in the aesthetics of how I'm writing.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. When you work in the morning, is there any kind of specific rituals you do? Do you listen to music? Do you like to stay quiet? Do you drink coffee?
I'm a coffee and music guy.
Okay.
I like coffee. I like music. I like having my space that I use, the same place generally, mm-hmm. To write in. I can go from place to place, but I generally sit and write at my desk in my office, at home. I play music because I just need background, and try to go uninterrupted as long as I can before I have to move to something else. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sometimes the coffee sometimes interrupts me. There was a while when I was writing the book, I was trying to get that done, so I was writing every day for 3 hours or 4, and I would my habit, because I was interested in dreams as well. My habit had been for a while, I would wake up in the morning, flip on the coffee and start writing immediately before I was even awake. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kind of reach into that liminal space between dreaming and waking.
Right.
Now I tend to drink the coffee first and then start writing.
No, I hear you. That's very interesting. So couple of things that, I wanted to talk about, because I have students that are working on their dissertations, mm-hmm. and they find it very challenging, mostly because they haven't written like this, I'm in education, so I don't always get people that have some sort of narrative writing framework. And I imagine that's also the case in many other fields too. People don't always come with some sort of narrative writing background, whether it be creative writing or expository writing or anything like that, so a lot of times they are analyzing the data and they're trying to write the representative piece simultaneously, and it's hard. It's very hard for them to figure out, like, how do I write this? How do I make it compelling? How do I make it rich? And it's very hard. So if you think back to some of the times that, you were starting off and you were doing this, were there similar challenges, or did you come up with challenges, or what are your challenges when you write and how do you navigate that?
So like in dissertation writing, I always tell people this is what I did when I wrote my dissertation. I had never even read a dissertation. I didn't know what that was when I became a PhD student. I mean, I knew people had to do it, but I didn't know what it was. I had written a master's thesis, but my knowledge of the dissertation was, this is harder and bigger.
Yes.
That's about as far as I knew.
Yeah.
So what I did when I became a PhD was I asked my professors, what are the 3 best dissertations you've read that you would recommend that I read? And put them on the spot, because they're the ones that are on committees like you and me, who have read good ones and read not so good ones. I wanted the best ones to be my models. Not that they were in the topic area that I was in or anything like that, but just what a good dissertation looks like.
Yeah.
So I went and I read at least the opening chapters to get a model for that kind of writing, to get the idea of the flow and the rhythm and how this writing goes. And then, of course, I broke all the rules when I did mine. Mine was a little bit off the wall. They let me have a lot of rope to hang myself with, because I was a writer who wrote creatively. So, but I always say to people, the best dissertation is the finished one.
Right.
Unfinished dissertation is not a thing. Like it's just notes. It's just partial something. Right. So I tell people, this is one case where you do want to write every day. You want to figure out a block of time. Novelists do this a lot. They write for 4 hours a day, every day, and it might be garbage that they're writing for 2 or 3 of those hours, but they look for the gold. I'm saying do something on the dissertation every single day till the thing is done. Right. And preferably there's some writing in there. The background stuff, the literature and all that sort of stuff can be done as you go, but it needs to be, I think this is one case where you need to be disciplined.
Yeah.
More so than me, a tenured full professor who I don't have to produce at the level that I used to. I do anyway, but I'm not under the gun of any kind anymore.
Right.
But they are under the gun, and ABD is not a degree.
No, ABD is not a degree. No.
ABD is just not done.
So what I often have to, in my own practice, and then I notice with the students, is when I'm scared of writing and I'm not willing to make writing my friend, I go to reading. I have to just read everything, because until I read, how can I write? I don't know what I'm writing until I read. It's a procrastination move, and it's a rationalization move as well. But at the same
time, to be very clean, you should try writing another dissertation. People spend all their time taking out the trash and sweeping out the attic.
Yes. I have had students tell me that their houses are clean, their nails are done, their pets are washed, their babies are washed. I mean, a lot of things get done when the dissertation needs to be written, so it has other catalytic functions. But when do you do your reading? If you have a writing time, do you read when you're writing, or do you separate time for reading and writing?
I'm always reading. I mean, I'm just reading all the time. I don't really stop that. I don't really attenuate it to my writing in any way. I mean, sometimes I have books out with me when I'm writing, open to the pages that I need and that sort of thing. But mostly, I would say you kind of have to be a reader to be a writer. You have to know how language works, and that's the only way to learn that is through reading. So I don't really, but I also, something you said about making writing your friend, I think one of the ways that I've been able to do that is following the novelist Anne Lamott's advice, which is give yourself permission to write shitty first drafts. Give yourself permission to not be good at it while you're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not about producing perfect writing from the beginning. All good writing is rewriting.
Right.
It's the process of revision. But you might write for 2 hours and think you've written nothing but crap, but there may be a piece of gold in there. That's how they pan for gold, right? They go in a creek and they get a pan and they shake out all this sand, and there's one little tiny gold nugget, and that's a win. Same thing is true here. If you get some gold out of some writing that was a struggle, sometimes writing is a struggle. You get some gold out of it and you move on to the next day. And then over time it gets easier. I have an advantage. I've been writing stories since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
I started when I was really small. As soon as I was old enough to figure out how to know how to do it, I was doing it. So I have a lot of practice. But I tell my students all the time, the only way you learn any skill, any sort of talent that you've cultivated, anything in your life, you don't learn how to play the piano by not playing the piano.
Right.
You don't learn it by reading sheet music either.
Yeah.
You learn it by sitting down at the piano and sounding terrible for a while.
Yep.
And then eventually you sound better.
Yeah.
True of anything, sports, anything you do. You have to. At one point, we had to learn how to drink out of a bottle. I was watching a friend has a baby, a little baby trying to do that now moving to a cup from a bottle, and the kid spilled it all over himself and laughed. We now are afraid to make a mistake on our computer in writing, when really that may be the best mistake you ever made. I say enjoy it, sit down and enjoy the writing. And if it doesn't amount to anything, it's fine. If it does, it does.
Yeah. We have a saying that we have been doing is we're saying like we have a writing group on Facebook, and we call it Words on Paper. So what we do is the motto is we first put words on paper, we make it pretty later. So we write all the words. That's what we say. We write all the words. All the words that need to be written, they're on paper. They could be really shitty words, but then we make it pretty later. But at least there are words on paper, and we're not looking at a blank screen. One of the things, the last question I wanted to talk to you about was, you have been writing for a while, and you have a lot of practice writing, and you have been recognized for your writing, and legitimized, widely for your writing. So what do you do now to up your game? Or are you doing anything, or do you just go like, I've arrived, I'm sitting in the king turn of writing?
Up my game.
Do you have to up your game anymore, or is it good now?
I don't tell people this very often, but I haven't had a rejection in 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what I write gets accepted for publication, even without revision. So upping my game means taking on new challenges, different kinds of things, like writing a performance piece, or like doing a new project. I'm doing a project now for a book chapter on something I haven't done before, which is writing about a television series that I love, but I have never really done. It's not criticism per se. It's still autoethnographic in a way, but it's about my relationship to this television series. And that's a new kind of thing for me. So I guess that's kind of where I go to new things and try to do. I love what you're saying, though, because what I've been wanting to do is write something in a way that nobody else has ever done.
Right.
I don't even know what that is, but I don't know what that would look like. But I would like to write something that people can read and recognize as good writing, but it's different from what you've seen. And one of the problems I think in academia is, and one of the reasons that I got drawn into autoethnography is it was different. I started reading Bud Goodall's book years ago when I was in graduate school, The Casing of Promised Land. It was the only academic book I'd ever seen that was written in the second person. He's putting you, the reader, in his shoes. Really tricky way of writing something. It was very original. It was very different. It was something that really drew me. It was sort of like not the standard research report,
Right.
It was an organizational ethnography. It was about an organization, but it was also what was fascinating to me was, and I was studying organizational communication at the time, but what was fascinating to me was how it was rendered on paper. So I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in coming up with new ways to express research, to kind of come across, to do. And I'm also very engaged and interested in not just having people with PhDs read what I write.
Right. Yeah.
So I want, other human beings to have access to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we do at graduation every year is we play, sitting in the crowd of faculty, is that I'm always looking for the longest dissertation titles and whether or not I understand what they're saying. So often they're in statistical fields that are really long, difficult things, but education has done pretty well. Science has done pretty well in terms of just like whole paragraph titles for a dissertation, 5 or 6 lines of print in the program. And then I think mathematics wins in terms of incomprehensibility of the terminology.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I always thought I would love to see a dissertation that's just one word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. I wasn't going to ask you this, and I was going to wrap it up. But now that you said something, now I have one more question, but this would be the last one. So one thing that you said that is really something I've been also thinking about is this writing and writing across disciplines and writing for more than the people will definitely read your work. That's a lot harder to do because then you're not just talking to people who have read the same thing, who have the same sort of, orientation towards autoethnography or writing like that. And at the same time, in my own work, I'm moving away from poking the reader in the eye unless I really have to show them where I'm doing theory. It's not that I'm not doing theory, but I'm beginning to think that good writers that I have read who do theory, not so much in social science work, but creative writers, and novelists. And when they come from a theoretical perspective, let's say they're postmodernist or whatever, they do it, but they don't poke your eyes with it every time they're doing it, Richardson's book, the one about the Sojourn book about her operation, she did the whole creative writing autoethnography, and then towards the end, because our stakeholders want to know how is this academic or how is this sociology or how is this whatever, she did like, okay, here's race and here's this construct and here's this health science construct and here's how I did it and here's blah blah blah, and she did all of that. And I am beginning to move towards that. I'm beginning to say, like, if I really enact and embody theory, it comes out in my writing without me hitting everybody with a hammer on their head. Where are you with that? How do you use theory in your writing?
I use it. I do. I weave it in. I make the assumption that without hitting. So I have a background in philosophy and religious studies. That's what I did before I was in communication studies. And and my background in philosophy was reading existentialist philosophers who were the first philosophers really to write their philosophy as novels. So think Albert Camus or Jean-Paul Sartre writing plays. They're writing plays and novels. Dostoevsky. They're doing existentialist philosophy through the medium of the novel. Right. So I write in that sort of at least following the paradigms and protocols of narrative fiction, character building, dialogue, all those sorts of things. If we're doing philosophy, sometimes we're doing pretty heavy duty philosophy in there, but I'm having my characters do it. I'm having the writing do it with the reader. So I'm like you, not trying to do some kind of heavy theoretical sort of setup and then some kind of story to go with it. I'm more likely to have. So one example, I wrote a piece for a journal called Communication Theory, which you wouldn't think a guy like me would get stuff into. my piece was called Accidental Dialogue. What I wanted to do was heavy-duty dialogue theory, but show it through the writing of dialogue among characters in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So in the process of writing that, what came out of it was some serious conversations with my son as exemplars of sort of spontaneously emerging dialogue in the in the theoretical frame of the philosopher Martin Buber. But I also then in the review process, I got questions from the reviewers. And the way and so they wanted me to address a series of questions about what I was doing. So the way I set that up is I set us up in a scene having coffee at a coffee shop, me, reviewer A, reviewer B, and the editor. We're having coffee in a coffee shop, and we're talking through some pretty deep issues related to how the philosophy of dialogue works.
I love that. That is awesome.
So
I guess they responded well to that, right?
It worked. It worked. Yeah, that one got them. They were like, "Oh, we're in this now. We can't reject it." He's got us as characters in here. So, that to me was a way to show the process, both the process of review and criticism of a piece like that, but also the process of how we might engage in a fruitful dialogue around the issues that were raised as questions. So I like to do it that kind of that way, like building it in to the narrative or the story. I don't want to do whole separate big long theoretical treatises as part of it. I see why Richardson did what she did. I think that's a good way to handle it too. I don't know that it's always necessary. Sometimes it is, depending on the field.
Yeah,
I do talk a lot to my students about what I call genre bending. We talk about gender bending. I talk about genre bending and genre shifting. Like, there are many different ways to write about sort of academic knowledge or whatever it is, research, right? There are many different forms it can take. It can be a straight up report. It could be a narrative. It could be on a performance piece. It could be, there's lots of genres we could write our way through these things. And there's nothing wrong with having more than one. Not necessarily in the same piece, but more than one audience may mean more than one way of rendering my research. Yeah. So for example, if you're getting a grant and you have to report back to the agency, that's one way of expressing what you learned. Mm-hmm. And then you have an audience of academics. Maybe you have an audience of the broader world. You might be writing 3 different documents about the same project that have different ways of saying what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I think if you do that and you pull it off successfully, you've just figured out something pretty big. You've done something that you should be able to pat yourself on the back for, because you've been able to say it in multiple ways and get it over to multiple audiences.
It's harder to do it like that. And sometimes I have to do that expository writing to sort out what the creative writing needs to look like, and other times I need the exposition because, I'm a methodologist, so I have to detail my methods so that the people that are coming after me can use it as a justification, So sometimes I have to say, I made this move, and then I made this move, and then I made this move. I don't want to say that, but I say that for the people that may not have friendly audiences in their space, so they can take some paragraphs or something from mine and cite it. But, if I'm writing a plain autoethnography, I am just looking for the spaces where I can do that genre bending as well. What 2 to 3 pieces would you recommend people read from your work?
From my work?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Do you want them to read Transgressions?
Transgressions, you could put that one down. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Okay. That's about power.
That's fine.
Communication in the institution of higher learning. Off the top of my head.
How about the dialogue one?
The dialogue one, yeah, we could do that. It's in communication theory.
It's called Dialogues?
It's called Accidental Dialogue.
Accidental Dialogue, okay.
You You get the theme of accidental ethnography. I was writing accidental ethnography, my book, at the same time as I was doing that. Accidental dialogue. I was into that stumbling kind of thing, stumbling into things. I could say maybe a piece called an autoethnography of memory and connection. That's the one that I talked about, where the Beatles lyric.
Okay.
Or the series of things.
Where is it published?
That's in Qualitative Inquiry.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. I am going to do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to put it into YouTube.
Okay.
And so I am going to